Chapter 13, A Girl Called Love, from JE2US-A Novel. Bartholomew made eye contact with me today. Briefly, very briefly, but that is the first time I have seen him do that. Of course, he then followed that up with, "Sell your crazy somewhere else, we're all stocked up here." I'm not sure if he was making a reference to himself or to our tribe. Both fit. When we had left the bridge yesterday, a crowd had gathered, surrounding Jesus. It started with a few hundred, but within an hour it had swelled to several thousand. There were cancer patients, people with MS, people with arthritis, congestive heart failure, diabetes, depression. They all came with varying degrees of hope that this Jesus might, in fact, be able to heal them. They had heard the stories, seen the testimonials. Was it possibly true? Could he heal them? So for several hours they lined up, and Jesus touched them. For 3 hours, I saw a 100% cure rate. No surgery, no medication, just a touch. Healed, new. Sure, for many of these people, there would have to be tests, lab results to determine if they were healed. But in my heart, I had little doubt about the outcome. As a med student, someone who knew a bit about how the human body works and doesn't work, I had no category for what I was seeing. The power coming through his hands and his voice seemed to crackle with energy, more than sufficient for anything that came his way. I walked away after 2 hours, putting a bit of distance between myself and the action. I sat down and put my head in my hands. Who is this Jesus, really? I felt like my head might explode. Where does that kind of power come from? How do I explain it? A few weeks ago, there was no room in my thinking for what I had now seen with my own eyes. Was he a god? Was he a prototype, a predecessor of a fully enlightened human? Something we could all realize. Hell, maybe he's an alien. I just didn't know. Jesus had started out as a curiosity in the Twin Cities, but in recent weeks, he had grown into a full-fledged obsession. It was hard to watch a local newscast without some mention of his latest bizarre escapades. It seemed everyone was picking sides. The middle ground was least populated. The politicians, whether they loved him or loathed him, all were eager to be seen in his company. The police department loved the peace message, but feared the simmering whispers about an uprising. Businessmen, hoping to ride the coattails of the latest, greatest, hottest thing, were trying to get him to speak at their conventions, endorse their products, or at least a photo op. Who wouldn't want their picture taken with this celeb du jour? The offers started rolling in. Judas had come to Jesus offering to be his manager, his booking agent. "We could make some serious money doing this, Jesus," he had reasoned. "Think of all the good we could do with those dollars." But again, Jesus had been totally uninterested, angering Judas to no end. Even though most religious leaders fell somewhere between indifference and abhorrence, the institutes of religious studies were all buzzing with the philosophies of Jesus. Religious leaders of every stripe were debating his messages and his theories. Actually, more of them seemed interested in his marketing approach, wondering how a virtual unknown with no money and no PR firm had managed to capture the attention of the city and increasingly the country. Speaking of which, several national networks had been nosing around looking to tell the story of this Jesus. So far, he had avoided doing any actual on-camera interviews, but we all knew it was just a matter of time. The momentum was set. The Church of the Brotherhood was the one group that seemed to be fully vested in this Minneapolis Messiah. They loved him. But then, why wouldn't they? Jesus was now a tattooed, card-carrying member of their ranks, complete with his own number. Many people had noticed that Jesus now had a slave number on his hand, but their curiosity about that played second fiddle to the fact that he was healing people. If somebody can heal your son of cancer, you don't give a rat's ass if they have a number tattooed on their hand. You just want your son healed. But eventually, we knew the question would get popped. There was a reporter in the crowd who finally threw it out there. I see you and your followers all have slave numbers on your hand. What's the story with that, Jesus? Did you sell yourselves to someone? The whole crowd leaned forward, excited to be the first ring of those to hear the latest gossip. Jesus, seeing a little girl, 2 or 3 years old, dancing around innocently in front of him, seemed to get distracted and just watched her while the crowd waited for his response. She was wearing a sundress of bright yellows and reds. Her hair bounced as she danced, singing a little ditty joyfully. Jesus kneeled down by her and held out his arms. She looked at him hesitantly for a second. Then, her trust earned by his smile, she walked into his arms. Holding her with his right arm, he stood and looked back to the crowd, saying, "You ask an interesting question. Did I sell myself to someone?" He paused. "You cannot sell what you do not own. I am not my own, but a slave to the love of my Father." The little girl played with Jesus' hair and pulled gently on his earlobe. Sebastian sat in his office, his robe unzipped to the waist. The television attached to the far wall sent colored splashes of light ricocheting about the room. The 6 p.m. news was droning on. Jesus, again front and center, the focal obsession of the local stations. Bastard, Sebastian exhaled under his breath. The coverage was of the scene by the river from earlier in the day. "Look at her," Jesus said, tenderly holding the little girl. "I see my Father's eyes in this little one. He has placed that same innocence in each of you, the same capacity to love and be loved. I have traveled a great distance to personally bring that love back to humanity." "Great distance," shot back Sebastian. "You're from Ely, fucking Ely." "So who is my master?" Concluding, he now lifted the little girl high above his head. Gazing into her eyes, he said, "She is my master. Her name is love. My Father has sent her to teach us how to love, and I intend to serve her with my last breath." "Oh God, Jesus," breathed Sebastian with disgust. They cut back to the reporter, who was saying, "We've tracked down the little girl from earlier today, the one that Jesus was holding, the one he said was his master. Her real name is Sofie Johanssen. Her parents live in South Minneapolis, and they have never met Jesus before. We asked her mother, Elizabeth, if she knew why Jesus would have called Sofie his master. I don't know. He's obviously a guy who likes to paint word pictures, and he uses whatever is convenient to do that. Sofie was a cute prop for him, I guess." She realized that might have sounded like a judgmental statement, so she clarified, "No, I didn't mean it that way. It's just that this Jesus character uses imagery to teach ideas. I actually think that's pretty cool. And really, why is everyone getting so riled about this guy? I mean, what has he done? He metaphorically sells himself to love, and we get upset by that?" She continued, even though it looked like the reporter was trying to wrap it up. "If you ask me, Jesus' brand of love seems a whole lot more genuine than what I've seen from the Baal priests." Sebastian removed his ruby collar and slammed it onto his desk. The state media network was going to hear from him. The story ended with another quote from Jesus. "So yes, I am bound, but I am free. I have been bought, yet I am an heir. I am a slave, but I am my master's beloved son. And I have come inviting you to shackle yourselves to this freedom, this love." The news anchor moved on to the next story. "Think, Sebastian, think," he said, talking to himself. No one had ever gotten under his skin like this before. He prided himself on being intelligent enough to always be a move or two ahead of his adversaries. He twirled the ruby in his hands until it came to him. A plan. He zipped his robe back up to the neck. placed the ruby necklace back where it belonged, and a dark smile unfurled across his face.